Welcome back, everybody, to the JSS podcast. I am your host, Byron Enriquez, the casual executive. And today I want to talk a little bit something little bit special. Today's a little bit of a different day. It's my birthday. Celebrating a little bit today, trying to take a little bit of time to myself and family and do some fun stuff. So that got me thinking about the topic for today's episode. And so I was uh, as just kind of thinking about it, I was like, you know what, maybe we should talk a little bit about work-life balance. Um, and not in the traditional sense that, everybody talks about work-life balance and you need it, and we all know that it's important. It's one of those buzzwords that's been around forever. Um, but as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a salesperson, as somebody who's building a business, it can be very hard, right? It can feel, I mean, honestly, sometimes it feels impossible, right? To be able to have that balance because we're constantly on, our phones never stop ringing, emails continuously going, opportunities don't wait. That pressure to stay consistently engaged is constant, and the way we look at it, and I know I'm super guilty of it. It's, hey, you know what, if this isn't getting, if I don't do this, if I don't answer this call, if I don't answer this email, then that could be an opportunity that I'm missing, right? We don't generate revenue when we're not on, when we're not closing deals, when we're not raising capital, when we're not sourcing new properties, we're not generating revenue, and that can feel sometimes kind of strangling with it, that you're constantly having to be on and having to do to work on something. Again, I'm super guilty of it. My wife actually has a whole reel of pictures that she's constantly taking of me, um, being in different scenarios, different parts of the world, on vacation, and I'm on the phone, right? Just constantly on the phone. And there's a picture of us in Mexico climbing a pyramid, and I'm taking a call. There's so much of that, and it really gets me thinking, and it's hard to really unplug sometimes, and we live in a society where we celebrate the hustle, right? We're always hustling, always chasing, always going after it, and as much as I big proponent, and that's important, um, it's also important to take a little bit of time, disconnect, and be intentional about your resources. Um, the way I look at it is this, it's, if you don't take that time for yourself, if you don't unplug, if you don't reset, recharge, um, it ends up costing you, I think, in the long run, right? And I think it's, yeah, you know what, we always have to be available for those opportunities, take the calls, take the client meetings when needed, but you do have to make time. And for me, it's always been something, and I struggle with it. Not saying I don't. Um, it's that when it doesn't always have to be equal time that you're setting. Hey, if I'm going to work 8 hours, I'm going to take 8 hours for family. If I'm going to, do this, I'm going to do that. It's that's impossible, right? We all know that as entrepreneurs, as leaders, that's impossible. But my thing has always been, if I can take that time and put some time aside, and you be intentional and be present during that time, then it makes it worthwhile, right? And that's the time. But the way I wanted to kind of talk about work-life balance today is just to kind of harp and kind of reiterate a lot of the topics that we've been talking about last few weeks, about having systems in place and having a structure. I think for us as entrepreneurs, as leaders, as salespeople, as all of the above, the way we can achieve that work-life balance is by implementing some systems, by implementing some structure, to be able to work smarter, to give you that time, for whatever it is that you feel necessary. One of the things that, as I've coached different people and different salespeople and different leaders, one of the questions that I've always asked them is, uh, their definition of success, right? Because that is independent. That is very different, I think, for each individual. Um, and that is what drives us, right? That's our why. What people talk about, what's your why? Why do we do what we do? That's the driving force, that defines what we do and why we do it, right? So in this aspect of it, I would tell, it's we're building something and we're growing and we're trying to expand and we're trying to, but why are you doing it? What is that desired outcome? What is your goal with that, right? Are you trying to build financial independence? Are you trying to give yourself free time? You're trying to leave a legacy? You're trying to leave something for your family? What's that reasoning behind why we're building? And when you start looking at it in that aspect of it, I think it really changes how we approach things, how we do things, the time that we set aside for certain things. Because if we're really doing this to make more time with our family and to be able to have some more financial freedom and more liberties, but yet then we're working 20 hours a day, every single day, 7 days a week, then are we accomplishing what we're out to what we set ourselves out to do, right? Or are we just burning ourselves out? And that's the struggle. And I constantly, it's one of the things that I talk about to people. I'm a very motivated individual. I'm very driven. I have goals and aspirations in mind. But it's also important to be able to level set and figure out, okay, why am I doing this? Is it what's that goal? Why am I really trying to do this, right? And again, but the things that I teach and I preach about is being intentional with your time, work time, but also with your free time, right? Be intentional, unplug, level set. That's when I think the creativity, even for a business, it helps, right? When we turn it all off and we're not involved, we're not in the business. That's when you can take a step back and work on the business and kind of dream a little bit. Allow yourself to dream. You know, we all start we all started these businesses or this investings, things that you started it because of a dream, right? You thought about it one night when you were like, I would love to flip properties. I would like to invest in real estate. I would like to own an apartment building. I would like to, whatever it is that you decided and you dreamt of. But then we get so caught up in the day-to-day stuff that you forget about that dream and you don't allow yourself that time to be able to let it breathe, let it just kind of evolve and grow into what it needs to be. You never reset. You're not thinking strategically anymore. You don't take that step back, and that's not real leadership, right? You're so involved in the day to day and that spreadsheet and closing the next deal and the next deal and the next deal and the next deal, which, don't get me wrong, extremely important. Um, but you're not allowing your space to think. You're not allowing your space to dream. You're not letting that, you're not letting this, let me say it differently. You're letting the business take over you. You're letting your investment opportunities define you when that's not who we are, right? That's just a part of what we are, right? But that's ultimately, it's why did you start this? To create freedom, to build your legacy. Um, but if you're making money, but then you're not present with your family, if you're growing, but you're missing life, if you're closing deals, but you're constantly stressed out, then is it worth it? And I get it. That's that balance that we're trying to figure out, right? Because real wealth is when you're in control. You're in control of your time. You're in control of your decisions. You're in control of your schedule. You're in control of where you're putting your energy. You're not letting it control you, right? That, to me, that's the real wealth. That's the real goal that we're looking to accomplish. And again, it's it takes work to get to that point, right? I've gotten to the point in my life where I have the ability to take some time off and be able to enjoy myself and take time, and even during the week. And I'm like, hey, I'm not going to work today. I'm going to go wine tasting with my wife. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. And I'm allowing myself those liberties when maybe 15, 20 years ago, I didn't do that. And it creates unneeded stress, unnecessary stress in your life where, sometimes the deal's still going to be there tomorrow, and I get it. Some things are important and have to be dealt with. And that's why I always tell my wife, it's like, look, even if I'm going to take some time off, if there's certain situations that I will answer, or, because I understand. But you're still being intentional. You're still being present. I'm still trying to unplug as much as possible. And it's a again, I'm not perfect. It is something that I'm evolving and growing and trying to learn as I've gotten a little bit older in my old age. But in order to do that, I think it's important to create that structure um, around you, and it's create systems in place. Bring people on if needed to be able to help you evolve if that's your goal. If you're looking to build something bigger, then don't feel that you have to do it all yourself. We micromanage everything as business owners. We wear many hats. I always make the joke that I'm IT department, I'm the accounting department, I'm this, I'm that. When I'm learning and to try to distance myself and be able to hand some of that stuff off. Um, because it's important to be able to delegate. That's a very big quality of leadership. And as business owners, I think a lot of times we feel that we have to do it ourselves. I was a couple weekends ago, I was talking to a couple friends who are also business owners in different lines of business. And one of the things we were talking about was like, yeah, nobody does the job as good as me. And that was their attitude towards it. And they're in different things in different fields, and I get it. And sometimes that's the way as business owners, that's the way we feel, that nobody's as good of a salesman as me. Nobody is as good as a um, electrician as me. No is as good as a pool man as it. Whatever business you're in, right? It's you started this business because you felt you were the best at what you do, and you have something of value to add, right? But and then how do you separate the two and be able to say, hey, you know what? I need to take a step back because I'm not building a job for myself. I want to build a business. How do you take that step back and let this business grow and evolve? And every line of work is different, and how you surround yourself with people, who you bring on, because sometimes, and I'm very guilty of this. Sometimes I think when we try to take everything on ourselves and try to do it, you're missing things. You get sloppy. You miss details. You rush through things sometimes because you have four more tasks on your plate before you can go home, because you're trying to be intentional about, hey, 8 hours at work, 8 hours at home. So you set that cutoff and you're like, I have to finish these five things before I can leave at 5 o'clock or six, whatever time it is. So now you find yourself rushing through things to get to something and that's when you overlook things. You're not taking the proper steps and analyzing the risk of this transaction or this opportunity, and you're rushing to make those decisions where you're not you're losing your strategy. You're falling outside of those parameters just because you're trying to rush to get through things. And I think then, so that's where that burnout, it really affects your performance. You're trying to do too much is affecting your performance, which ultimately will end up costing you, right? And so that's where we're always like, well, I don't want to lose these deals because I don't want I can't afford to lose this money. But and then on the flip side of it, you're doing too much where it's end up costing you money, right? And it's a hard balance to do, and that's what I think it's super important for all of us to build, that system, to build a rhythm where you know your rhythm and your structure and how you do things. But you're giving yourself time to breathe. You're giving yourself time to think. You're giving yourself time to rest. That's super important, especially as we get a little bit older. I used to go 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 all the time, and I still can go, but not go go go. It's a little bit different. But that affects your performance. It affects how good we are. And ultimately that ends up costing us money. Right. So to me, that's what I wanted to kind of focus on today, because I think it's important where, how we do the things that we do, how we approach these mentalities, how we approach our business, because, we're working on building, we're working on growing, we're working on, not missing opportunities, which I think are extremely important. But why are we doing it? Right? Why are you working so hard? Why are you, taking time off, taking time away from your family? Why are you doing all the things that are hard? Because we're looking to build something. We're looking to leave a legacy. You're looking to build, financial freedoms. Um, but if you're sacrificing yourself to get there, then I think we need to reevaluate. Right? And I think it's important not to lose ourselves, not to lose that drive and why we wanted to do it. I mean, I've known so many people. I myself have gone through it where you work so much and you go through through this pressure, and then you get to a point where you're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. You turn your back on it all. You're just like, never again. It was a time after the 08, 09 mortgage crash where I was just like, I don't want anything to do with this. I'd gone through some very difficult times with previous businesses that I owned and partners, and it was just very difficult, and I was burnt out, and I just was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't want any part of it. You know, Luckily I was able to give myself that some time to rest and breathe and dream again of what I wanted to do. And I kind of reinvented myself and started over, and build something else, and it's taken time. But I'm trying to build something a little more sustainable, something with more longevity. If you're not taking those steps to do so, you're one and done. You're going to work yourself to an early grave. You're going to work yourself to a point of exhaustion where you're just not going to be able to operate anymore. And then that's when you let things go. I've seen so many business owners, operators who get to the point where it's just they bury their head in the sand. And they're just like, that's it. I got nothing left. And then everything crumbles. But the whole point of this is to build something that we can enjoy. Right? Something that, look, I love what I do. I enjoy waking up every morning. I enjoy coming to the office. I enjoy recording these podcasts as much as I complain about them. No, I'm trying to build something that I enjoy, but it's important for me to leave that time to have that balance. And in order to do so, implementing systems, using the tools. We're one of the things we're working on right now here at JSS is, we're building some better systems and databases and CRMs. We're using tools like ChatGPT. We're using Claude. We're trying to create workflows and systems to be able to improve and allow us to be able to work smarter, so that if our goal is to grow and expand, we're not going to grow ourselves into the grave. We're not going to grow ourselves to the point of exhaustion. And I think it's important. I've built companies before, and I've had a couple hundred employees, and at the time that was the way you did it. You grew, but now in this second iteration of what I'm building is I'm building something that's smarter, more intuitive, more systems based, where with a tenth of the amount of staff that I had before, and I can accomplish bigger things. Right? I'm using the tools at our disposal. I'm using resources. I'm using the know-how. I'm using a lot of the knowledge that I've learned over the past 25 years being in this business. And I think it's important for all of us to be able to have that. But really, ultimately, it's why do you want to do this? Right? Why do you want to put yourself through this? There's a meme that somebody sent me recently, and it said, I quit my 9 to 5 so I can work 24/7. Right? And a lot of times that's how it feels. That's how it feels. But if we're not intentional, if you're not scheduling, you don't have your systems in place, then this business, any business, will really eat you up. And then what good are you at that point, right? If you're gonna fail, you're gonna fall flat because you just don't have the energy or the resources anymore. But I think that's the important part. It's take some time, celebrate your successes, celebrate, take some time. Like I said, today's my birthday. I'm probably get out here early today. My kids are going to dinner. We're gonna go celebrate a little bit. Take some time, enjoy yourself. Um, because if not, then what's the point of all of this? What's the point of working as hard as we do? And I'm a big proponent when you're working and it's time to get in, you grind and you work hard and you outwork everybody. But it's also important to give yourself that ability to rest. And I think a lot of times, um, as business owners, we don't want to give ourselves that permission. And I think it's important to allow yourself and give yourself that permission to take some time to rest, reevaluate, give yourself that time to dream a little bit, have those visions of what it is, fall in love with your business again, fall in love with your operations, fall in love with the things that excite us, right? Because this should excite you. If you're doing this just for money, then, I don't know. As my feeling is, if you're doing this for money, it's not worth it. There's a million other ways to make money. So anyway, that's kind of it. I wanted to just give a little bit of life update, kind of share with you guys some stuff, and hopefully motivate to empower you to make that time for yourself, because I think it's very, very, very important. Because that's how we accomplish big things. So anyway, thank you guys for listening. Appreciate it. See you guys next week.